Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. Apologies for my absence, but so glad to be back with all of you. At the time of filming this video, it marks the return of RPG Limit Break, a great charity-focused speedrunning marathon dedicated to one of my favorite genres, RPGs of course. It's inspired me to revisit some RPGs of my past, and what better console to look at than the NES. Let's jump in. Okay, first up, it seemed like the NES had a game for every decently big movie made during its life cycle. This one is named for its movie of the same name, which is also the namesake of the main character, Willow. Capcom throws its hat into the ring of the genre with this delightful action RPG, and it follows closely in the footsteps of the original Zelda with a top-down perspective and an emphasis on exploration and real-time combat. If you've never played this game before, it's possible to fall into some beginner traps. For example, like Zelda, the starting town will provide Willow with a starter sword. However, unlike Zelda, you'll need to explore the town a bit first to find it, and there's nothing preventing you from skipping it altogether on accident. Thankfully, you'll learn quickly either way to explore each town thoroughly to see what's there to be gained before venturing out into the danger. And the music will be a good indication of whether you're adventuring or whether you're in the safety of a town, which helps keep you protected. The map layout is definitely one of a maze variety, and it might be helpful to use a pen and sheet of paper handy next to you to help you navigate as you go through the game. Today, that tactile supplement might seem a bit atrocious for some, and I get it, but it's also pretty nostalgic for me as well, as it wasn't uncommon back then either. When you die, you'll restart at a convenient place, which is nice, but for some reason you'll need to re-equip all your stuff each time, and that's a minor gripe to say the least. Combat is fun, and while it's not turn-based, it retains a feel of random encounters, as monsters will pop onto certain screens, which is actually really cool. You can still choose to run or stand your ground and fight, or some combination thereof, because experience is actually awarded after each kill. As you'd suspect, once you gain enough experience, you'll level up, which is helpful in multiple ways. Your stats will increase, of course, but what's really impressive, especially for an NES game, is that your attack will get quicker. At level 1, you're slow and your combat is more harder as a result. At level 3, though, you start to see an increase in the swing speeds. You really do get the sense of progression beyond just numbers and equipment. Overall, this is a surprisingly inviting RPG that does a great job of immersion, exploration, and character progression that often goes overlooked in the bigger action RPGs like Zelda, but it's definitely one to check out and revisit. Let's move on. Okay, next up is the original Final Fantasy. What's there to say really about this series that hasn't already been said? Of course, today it's one of the biggest franchises around still, and it's cool thought that it also, alongside Dragon Quest, which is again another massive franchise today, started on this system, right? The NES was really a foundation for the genre in some ways. The graphics, music, and gameplay for the time really speak for itself, and you can see the core JRPG mechanics that would soon begin to dominate the entire RPG industry for a while to come. When I was growing up, I played this a lot, and I never really completed it until much later, but regardless of that completion, I found myself returning over and over as it's just a fun experience. That said, it's not without some issues. There are a few points where grinding experience and levels is likely required, and the pace of some of the battles can take a while as a result. The story is nothing exciting, and despite the shorter runtime for what you'd associate with a Final Fantasy game, There are some real lulls in the pace of that story, and it can feel tedious at times. One specific gripe that I have is the battle UI, and it just feels really dated at this point. And while I get that it's to represent separation on the battlefield, those frames are just distracting, and I fully admit that it's just me making a mountain out of a molehill. It's worth calling out the interesting aspect of party configuration at the start of the game though, where you can choose which generic fantasy classes that you want to form your party. If you want to have nothing but thieves, or maybe you want a more balanced approach, it's your prerogative, and it's nothing short of neat to really experiment with. The map design is great, and it hits a good balance on exploration without getting frustrating with a maze-like structure, especially when you add in the time element for dealing with random encounters. Overall, if you've enjoyed the later entries in this series and never played the original, it's an interesting opportunity to do so, as it, alongside some of the other iconic RPGs of the same time, really set the tone for the genre that launched it fully into mainstream gamers' hands. Let's move on though to the next game on our list. Based in the Tales of the Arabian Nights lore, here is the Magic of Scheherazade. This is an interesting and unique take on RPGs, with its time-mixing action from the likes of Zelda, with some more traditional role-playing concepts like experience points, leveling, and more. And yes, I said time-mixing. Chrono Trigger fans, eat your heart out. The time-traveling RPG was done on the NES, and it works pretty closely to what we saw in Chrono Trigger as well. You'll travel between time periods to recruit characters and take actions in the past to impact the future. The game is mostly a top-down perspective, but will randomly switch to a side view as well, kind of like how Zelda does it with those item rooms in the dungeons. There's plenty of screens and towns to explore, all of which just really feels good. The game has some funny quirks too though, and so for example, during the opening sequence, you'll get asked by multiple people if you'll take on the main villain of the game, of which you have to actually respond yes or no. If you say no, they assume you're just joking around and force you to ultimately say yes. And it happens actually a few times, which makes it seem somewhat comical because it's so close together. There's also some random things like a casino in the middle of this Arabian-style land, which just feels super out of place, but you can't help but just laugh at the concept. One of the more strange quirks though is its combat. Most of it's action based in this top-down perspective view, but other times you'll get thrown straight into a turn-based combat mode. Both systems work just fine, but it's a strange concept, right? To see these multiple and different battle systems, each with their own unique mechanics and styles, somehow mangled together to form whatever this is. Overall, this game doesn't get a whole lot of love, but there is a ton of charm here, and I'm a sucker for the time travel stuff in particular. If you haven't checked this game out yet, do so. Its fun aspect, lightheartedness, but also just kind of tight RPG experience in some ways really outweighs the quirks. Let's move on though to our next game. Okay, next up, this is Crystalis. The game takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting after war destroys most of the world, and you wake from a cryogenic sleep chamber, having been placed in there before the war raged on. It's an interesting story prompt for what turns out to be your typical early medieval setting, only instead of fighting monsters, you're fighting mutants from the nuclear fallout of the previous civilization. The storytelling to start you off is good, and it's combined with some really cool cutscenes that help set the immersion. Again, you'll need to talk to some of the townsfolk though to get your starting sword before adventuring outward. The exploration is done between a world map style view and then switches to a dungeon or building or cave-like setting when you enter those things as well. The controls are good and the combat feels fun and rewarding, actually one of the more tighter ones that we've talked about today. You'll gain experience and levels, pick up enemy loot, and kick open treasure chests and find new items to help you in your quest. Like Link, this hero can shoot a sword projectile as well, but this one is done by actually holding down the attack button to charge up a meter at the bottom of the screen. Later on, you'll get other upgrades that will expand your meter into multiple levels that allow you to do different things as well. Each enemy feels a bit unique here, but the bosses are by far the most standout in terms of your adversaries, and they should be, right? This Lich is the first boss of the game, and it does a good job of testing your skills and the character progression thus far. The graphics are good here, especially for the NES, but the music is another high point as well. One thing I haven't touched on much with these RPGs is that how you can save your game, right? And that's important because some of these are longer, especially for an early NES game. And I'm happy to say that Crystalis features a battery backup instead of a password entry like some of the other games on the list. I'm always a bit surprised by how often this game goes under the radar. It's such a fantastic RPG on the system, and I'd highly encourage everyone to try it out at least once if you've not already done so. Let's keep moving though on our list. Okay, here's a great addition to our list. This is called Sweet Home. Oftentimes referenced as the origin of the survival horror genre, this unfortunately Famicom exclusive also weaves in appropriate role-playing concepts into the gameplay, and that specifically cements its place on this list. I said it's a Famicom exclusive, and that means it's likely a challenge for folks to get their hands on, but I was able to secure a fan-translated ROM that was put on this cool NES board for playing it on real hardware, and that's just fantastic. I really can't say enough good things about this game, as it's just really ahead of its time in so many ways. You take control of 5 unique people as they enter a mansion in search of famous paintings when they become trapped and forced to explore their way to an exit. You can switch between any member of the party, if they're alive that is, but it's most common to form parties of 2s and 3s. Each party member has a unique item that is needed for certain situations, and so you'll be grouping them and rearranging them as the game goes on. This party forming and real-time switching is both not only impressive for its time in gaming history, but also works so well in terms of a game mechanic. You'll also notice some key inspirations for what would be baked into the first Resident Evil and subsequent titles, such as the limited and always contested inventory space, the monster-infested and scary atmosphere of exploring a mansion, and you'll even see the origin of the door animation cutscene transitions. As you explore this mansion, you'll run into random turn-based battle encounters that play out like the RPGs of its day, though I will say the menu system is very fast and responsive, and it takes away any of that tedious parts that you could associate. You're going to find new weapons along the way that will help you give a leg up in battle, but weapons won't be the only means of winning, as there's a prey mechanic, and also you can use each member's unique item, such as the camera on these bats for example, that will do a lot of damage as well. Keeping in line with the RPG mechanics, these fights will earn you experience points and you'll level up, right? Getting stronger as time goes on, which plays an important role as you'd expect of an RPG. There's also a call option that lets you bring in members of the other party into your battle for support, and that is incredibly unique too. The environment is nice and spooky, the mechanics are top-notch, and the puzzles are fun and rewarding, as is the combat too. This is a really fantastic game, and the fact that it was never made in the US, or at least got to the US shores officially, is nothing short of a crime against gaming. Okay, there you have it. Some interesting RPGs that fit so well on the NES and often get overlooked, right, in favor of the ones everyone already knows about, like The Legend of Zelda. I still can't put down Sweet Home or Crystalis, so I'm going to go back and finish both, but I'd love to hear which RPGs you all remember so fondly of from the 8-bit age, and let me know down in the comments below. It feels great to be back after a break, and I'm looking forward to talking more retro games with you all next time. But until then, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.